I just like to feel comfortable in my skin, so I just wear whatever I want. And especially during big events, I like to just dress how I feel.
All right, well, you do think men can get pregnant?
Yeah, I believe that trans men can get pregnant. I'm trying to get pregnant right now, and I'm a trans man, so yes.
Meet the Cobra from Ford's Performance Corner. It's the hot one for 1969. Cobra, Ford's new king of the road. With racing-style hood latches to hold down its 428 Cobra Jet V8. Cobra, born in the heat of competition at places like Riverside, Daytona, where when we win, you win. Cobra, high performance at the lowest price in Ford's Performance Corner. Cobra for 1969, new king of the road. Waiting for you at your Ford dealers now. Cobra, watch it. This one eats birds for breakfast.
I've always thought that in a society that demands conformity, and increasingly our society does, it's the floridly crazy people who are likely to see the truth. Not the whole truth, no one but God can see that, but flashes of it. The people who are a threat to the way things are almost never engaged directly. You almost never hear the following, well, you know, he made a point, and that's wrong for these 6 reasons. It's always, that guy's a nutcase. You know, racist, he's a bigot. Okay, yeah, I'm sure he is. Lots of people, you know, whatever, I'm not that interested actually. Like, what is he saying? You know, can you rebut the case that he is making to the extent he's making one? Like, what's wrong with the idea he just threw up in the air? I am not a populist. I think populism is not sustainable. Populism isn't a form of government. It's a warning sign that you've got bad elites. You will always have elites because people are hierarchical. It's in their nature. Dogs are hierarchical. Do you have any? You know that. There's a head dog. There has to be a head dog, period. It's just the way we're made, okay? So every society is hierarchical, including Venezuela and Sweden and the former Soviet Union. I mean, you're not getting around that. The only meaningful question is, how are your elites? Are they impressive? Are they wise? Are they making decisions that help people, or aren't they? And so my critique is really simple. We had a populist election last time, and that ought to be a terrifying wake-up call to anyone who's benefiting from our society right now. If you want to keep what you have, and I do, then you need to pay attention to the forces that gave rise to this thing. Don't ignore it, because it won't get better. It's like appendicitis. It's one of those rare things you can't ignore, I would say. I'm an Episcopalian. I hate whining more than anything. I hate complaining. My goal in life is to die with dignity without whining about it. So I hate whining more than anything. All I'm arguing for is a clear sight picture of what the goal is. That's all I'm arguing for. Okay, I'm not arguing for a different economic system. I'm not arguing for higher taxes on anybody. I'm not exactly sure what I'm arguing for. I'm not a policy guy. I'm a talk show host. But I sincerely believe that no problem is solved unless you have a very clear image in your mind of what you want the result to be. What are we shooting for? All this, trillions of dollars in the American economy, all this effort and IQ points focused on public policy. When it's all done, what do you seek to have? And the vision that I have for this country may be different from the one you have, but what I'm arguing on behalf of is a system where people who have no special advantage, including cognitive, people with an IQ of 100 who make 70 grand a year, have got 3 kids, living no place special, who don't know anybody, can have sort of a decent life. I'm not hoping they're all going to become entrepreneurs, whatever that is. Hope that talking point has died. It's too stupid. Most people are not going to be entrepreneurs. They can't pronounce it. It's like some French thing. That's not the goal, is entrepreneurship for the masses. And shame on us for claiming otherwise. The goal is to have just like a normal life. And not a guarantee that your kids will do better than you, but a reasonable, plausible hope of it. I'll tell you what the goal is demonstrably not. A country where the suicide rate is going up. You can throw any numbers you want at me. I don't care what the GDP is. I definitely don't care what your fake unemployment statistics say, because they're fake. And I really don't care what your inflation numbers say, the fakest numbers of all. All I care about is how people are doing. Think of it like your kids. You could be like, well, I don't know, you went to Choate and Middlebury. You're fine. It's like I'm on the verge of killing myself. I'm sorry, you didn't hear me. You went to Choate and Middlebury. You're fine. And it's like maybe the steps that you thought would produce the result that you desired were the wrong steps, or who knows what happened, but it doesn't matter because we're not getting to where we need to be. Life and death, like that's all that matters. And we're completely ignoring that in favor of the most abstract, cooked, stupid, totally immaterial numbers. They don't tell us anything. Those numbers tell us a lot. They don't tell us what the solutions are, but they tell us what the conversation should be. And so my only role as a non-public policy person is to try and just start the conversation on those questions. And it's amazing to me how hostile the reception is when you bring that up. And that tells you everything right there. Oh, shut up. You're just doing it for ratings. Really? If I was just doing ratings, we'd do the Benghazi show every day. You know what I mean? Like, really? No. I sincerely mean it. Do I seem like I don't mean it? Do I seem like I'm pretending to be a populist? Why would I be a populist? Do you know what I mean? Like, none of this stuff affects me personally, just to be totally clear about it. You know, I'm always going on about immigration, not because it has a single downside in my life. Not one, not a single one. I mean, the biggest downside is my neighbors hate me for it because it's like a threat to their nannies. Okay, I just really think it's true. Like, why else would I say it? But what I really want the party to do and our society to do is focus on making it possible for people to have kids. I'm serious. So the Republicans look at the numbers and they're fine at numbers, usually the wrong numbers, but whatever. And they look at the numbers and they're like, okay, our basic demographic, as we say in television, is aging, shrinking. You know, we need to bring some new people into this coalition or else we're never going to win anything. So we need to bring African Americans, Latinos, Asians, immigrants into this thing. How do we do that? So then Frank Luntz shows up and he's like, I've got a good idea. Just be super liberal in immigration. They'll love that. And all the dumb people in the Congress are like, yeah, that's a good idea. Because they don't believe anything they say anyway. And they hate themselves. So it's like that kind of comports with, in their hearts, they know they're wrong. Richard Brookhiser once said. Totally true. So look at the numbers. They never look at the next set of numbers, which is, okay, just take out white voters and just ask Latino voters or African American voters. Do you think we need a ton more immigration? We need maybe we have about 1.1 million a year people coming in legally now. Let's double it to 2. How would you feel about that? They're not for that at all. What are they for? They're for what everybody is for, which is the ability to raise your own kids. If you want to win new voters to your party, stop with the identity politics crap and go with the universal appeals that, again, by their nature, appeal to everyone. And chief among them is the freedom to raise your own kids. Now, why don't the only people who get to raise their own kids are rich people. Like everyone in my neighborhood has a parent stay home for that, not forever, but for that period when your kids are little and, birth to school or whatever. There's a several-year period where most parents, if given the choice, not all, nothing compulsory here, but if given the choice, most will stay home to raise their own children. But most people can't do that because they can't afford it. The one person, I hate to say this out loud, but it's true, before she went completely nuts, who wrote a book on this, and it's a great book, was Elizabeth Warren. And she did an academic study, it's called The Two-Income Trap. She wrote it about 10 years ago, again, before she went crazy, or she was sort of crazy, but she makes a good point, which is that actually we have told young women that they have this moral obligation to work for some creepy big company, give their lives over to some business for the benefit of shareholders above their duty to their own family. And that's really the message of modern feminism. You have a moral obligation to serve the market before you serve your family. And conservatives, for reasons that I honestly don't understand, have been like, yeah, that sounds right. That's totally right. That sounds like liberation. It's not bondage or anything. Well, it is bondage, actually. It's a lie, and it destroys people. Why would you tell your own daughters that? Like, I think your daughter comes to you, my husband and I love to have children. No, I really think you have an obligation. There's a quarterly earnings report out, and you got to work for that. You're not a shareholder, but you got to work for that. And that's what we're telling everybody, and both sides are complicit in it. How about the Republican Party pivots just a little bit and says, no, we want a society where if you want to, you can afford to have a family on one income. Because, by the way, we had that only for like 100 years, and it worked pretty great. We don't have it anymore, and maybe you'd like that. Would you like that? That's not an abstract promise, that's a concrete promise. Who knows how you get there? But why not start with what you want? And that's what I want. So what people forget is how rarely tried democracy has been. So between the Roman Republic and like the American Revolution, not a ton of democracies. What would be the number? Pretty much zero. Certainly none tried at scale. And so it's a new thing, and we're not exactly sure how it works. And there are a lot of very decent, Enlightenment thinkers, in fact, in Europe in the 18th century who looked over at America and were like, that will devolve into dictatorship because that form of government just does, always. And these were not monarchists saying this. These were like, people who wanted it to work but feared it wouldn't. So it's a very volatile form of government. We've had it for long enough that we never think that, but it's true. And the basic requirement of it is that you keep the broad middle fairly satisfied and also vested in the system. And when that stops happening, I'm not making a moral, I tend to be a bit of a moralizer and I'm embarrassed by it and I'm sorry. But I'm not actually making a moral case, I'm making a practical case. It's not sustainable. Venezuela will happen. Venezuela had, it's one of those things that happened like not very far away. It's only one time zone away. And it's a big country, and it was destroyed. And no one has thought through for 5 minutes why that happened. Probably a lot of reasons it happened, but a main reason was, and it didn't have to happen. I mean, I went to Venezuela as a kid. It was a totally nice country. Caracas looked like San Diego, kind of, where I grew up. And they had a big middle class, and it had obviously the world's largest known oil reserves, and it had an educated population, a lot of really smart people in Venezuela. They're all in Miami now, adding to the economy there. And it was really simple. The broad middle of the country, including a lot of members of the middle class, decided that, this wasn't working for them. A small group of people were running everything. I'm trying not to use the phrase income inequality, but that's what they were mad about. People are mad about that. Envy is a real thing. And they hired a guy who destroyed their ruling class and then destroyed the country. Now they don't have toilet paper and they're eating zoo animals. So that's not something that we should pay attention to? I think it is. I think a ton is at stake. I know everyone in Washington thinks Trump is just this weird orange anomaly who came out of nowhere and will, exit to somewhere and then we'll get back to Bob Dole. And that's not going to happen at all. And so we should, I think, as conservatives and politically minded public policy people should be thinking about how to keep this from going really wrong. The key mistake of people who hold power is believing that they will hold it forever and that they can do whatever they want when they have it. And that is a lie that they tell themselves. If you have power and you misuse that power, they'll get you. Every single time. What are the crimes that are punished? Thought crimes.
The small fringe minority of people who are on their way to Ottawa or who are holding unacceptable views that they're expressing.
Thinking the wrong thing, having the wrong beliefs, saying unapproved words. And those words are always true. They are always true. So when you hear somebody, and by the way, it's so hard to know what's true. I mean, often, to the extent I ever talk to people, which is fairly rarely, No, but like, going through an airport or something, I hate the news. It's all so dishonest. Where do you get your news? And I always try to be honest and say I don't get any news. I don't read any news. Are you joking? I haven't had TV in like decades. I wouldn't read the New York Times. I don't want that in my head. Do you know what I mean? It's like worse than horrible. And it's just bad for you. You don't put untrue things in your head on purpose. So how do you know what's true? Well, that's a great question. And in fact, it's like the only question really in life. And the honest answer is you can't really know because you're not God. And so I think it's super important to approach everything with the requisite humility, acknowledging that these things are very complicated and you can't really know. And at some point, probably the second you will know. And that's definitely the upside of it, in my opinion. But in this life, you can't, and you're never going to, and you're a lunatic if you think you can imagine the future or divine the precise truth about anything. Because you can't. And by the way, anyone who thinks he can is likely to become Mussolini. Like, that's a bad path. If you wake up in the morning and think, I'm the only person who possesses the truth, you are clinically insane. So seek help. But within the bounds of our abilities as people, you can get pointed in the direction. Where's the North Star? You can get there. And how do you know? And it's really simple. Who are the thought criminals and what are they saying? What are they saying? They're saying crazy things like the water's turning the frogs gay. What a crazy person. Let's make him pay $1 billion. Water's actually turning the frogs gay, that's true. Turns out. Years later they tell us. Turns out it's true. Yeah, it's actually true. I'm not endorsing any specific person's theories about anything. But I am telling you that the people who censor your words and thoughts this is one thing I'll say about them, they have a very precise and well-calibrated sense of what's important. They know. These are not frivolous people. They can smell like your dog can smell. Like your parents could smell in high school if you smoked a Marlboro. They know what's important. They don't waste any time in the unimportant stuff. And so I would honestly say a lot of the debates we have, and certainly a lot of the ones that I've engaged in, probably diversions from the things that really matter, honestly. And that may account for why every time I was out of the country last week and I came back and I feel like I've got a duty to be up on the news, to read all these texts, and like everything I read is like a new height of insanity. I'm like, that is the Mount Everest of lunacy. You can't get any crazier than that at all. Breastfeeding men or whatever. We're gonna give back Nebraska to an Indian tribe that no longer exists. We're not doing that, by the way. Omaha's safe. But I'm just saying, every one of these stories enraged me. And of course, that was probably the point. I really believe that the exponential growth of totally irrational claims by the other side, things that no sane person could, beginning with men can give birth, but there are a million of them, that these claims are actually designed to take people like me and send us off into a screaming fit so we don't notice that actually they're looting the country. I think that. I don't think there is a single member of Congress, except like maybe the dumbest, maybe Ocasio-Cortez or something, but the normal ones, or semi-normal ones, grading on a curve. I don't think there's a single Democratic member of Congress who cares at all about trans rights. I don't think there's a single one who thinks men can breastfeed, because not one in history ever has. Quite a bit of evidence to the contrary on that claim. I don't think they believe it. I really don't. And by the way, it's super important to push back against them and to call them crazy, because they are. I'm not saying a retreat from these things at all. I'm merely saying if they throw a story in your face that's so nuts that you can only growl like a dog in response, they're probably doing that on purpose. And you should probably look around and ask yourself, what are the topics that no one's even pushing back on? What are the topics that their response is so ferocious that people are like, I don't want to deal with it? One of them is Now there's COVID. And of course, the third is January 6th. And you have to ask, why is that? Well, it's not by accident, trust me. There is a reason. So, I don't know what, you know what, the thing about that story, it's just a mystery to me. No one was more shocked than I was. Are you serious? In the Biden White House, somebody left an 8-ball in a public, I said to my wife, it's just not in character, you know? I just don't believe it. It's clearly a setup. I went right back to Marion Barry and I was like, somebody set you up. I'm serious. It was, you know what I mean? It was like, it was so, I'll stop with it. That was my favorite story of all time. Because it just explains all the behavior. It really does. I mean, I worked in the media business for my whole life, so I know what the behavior looks like. But it's like crazed and grandiose. I've got a plan. You're not going to believe it. It's unbelievable. It's going to totally work. What we're going to do is we're going to totally rearrange everything, okay? We've been doing things a certain way for a long time, okay? And it's worked, but I've got a better plan. And that's their entire approach. So if I can just give you one piece of advice, after 27 years in the television business, don't trust a man with numb gums. I mean, abuse of power is always awful, any kind of power. Power, financial power, any kind of power, it's also really common. People abuse their power by definition. That's just a function of human nature. So I don't think it's surprising. The details are always jarring and jaw-dropping, and someone really did that. I mean, it's shocking, especially when it happens in an industry you're familiar with to people you know, and you know it's even more awful in a way. But if you take 3 steps back, I mean, it shouldn't surprise you that famous people who sort of bask in public adulation all day long behave poorly when the cameras are off. Yeah, I mean, I believe in no, of course I don't.
Yeah.
Everything I say on television I sincerely believe, and if I can just put in a plug for my employer, you know, one great thing about Fox, and this is totally sincere, is no one's ever told me what to say or what to think, ever, and there are not even any guidelines. So I feel completely free to say what I think, but often when, you know, people are yelling at me on train platforms or giving me the finger as I walk to lunch or whatever, on those occasions when I can talk to them, you know, you're awful on TV, you probably wouldn't like me in person either, because that's like kind of who I am. And one of the pitfalls, maybe the main pitfall of TV and of any kind of public job, is that you can wind up really caring what people you don't know think about you. And you're in effect, again, empowering strangers to control your life. And why would you, that's insane. Why would you ever do that?
Right.
So I'm naturally suited for this job because it's never occurred to me to sort of care what people who hate me think. I mean, I care about the ratings, and of course, I'm not impervious to it, but I'm not on social media. I'm not like trolling for affirmation from strangers. Why would you do that? I mean, you're never going to believe me, so it's probably pointless even to articulate it, but I really try not to think too much about how I'm viewed or what I say is going to be viewed, because it creates a kind of self-consciousness that drives you crazy. It's like looking in the mirror a lot or checking Twitter a lot. It pulls you out of yourself too much in a bad way, and you start seeing yourself through other people's eyes, and it diminishes you and makes you and jumpy and insecure, and all the things you don't want to be if your goal is to, you know, put on a good show and be happy and tell the truth, and you know what I mean? So I actually don't think a lot about that. But if you step back, I do think of my role as different from someone hosting a show on another channel. I mean, I feel like almost all the other news outlets that I see, and I've worked at most of them, are kind of in sync on what stories are important and how they ought to approach the stories. And that's fine, I'm mad about it, but I think there ought to be a role for someone who's looking at stories that aren't covered by everybody else. I mean, the reason that Fox hired me was in part to sort of take an hour. I'm not in charge of Fox. I have no influence over the rest of the channel. I just have responsibility for an hour. And put on what you think is important, inherently important, or that you think is important anyway, and say what you think about it. And that's what I do. So it's totally disconnected from what Stephanie Ruhl's doing on MSNBC or Anderson Cooper. I'm not against them, but those aren't relevant markers to me at all. And in fact, I think, I said I wouldn't be critical, but I will say this. I do think that there is a kind of childish groupthink in the media a lot.
Yeah.
You know, where people are checking other outlets to ratify their own decisions, and I kind of get that. There is a wisdom in the judgment of a crowd. However, at some point you have to say, well, no, this is important for these reasons. So tell me why this is important. As to the Russia thing, I've done a lot of Russia segments, probably too many, but I think we inflate its importance. And I also, by the way, think we pay way too much attention to Trump. I've always thought that. Trump is moderately interesting. I don't know. I can only speak for my show. We're not talking about it that much.
Okay.
That I'm aware of.
Yeah, you're not the one with the flow charts.
I don't know. I mean, I think my real opinion is I think there's something really interesting going on the Democratic side. I live in D.C., which is, I think it was 93 or 4%. It's the most Democratic city in the country, okay? So I'm surrounded by Democrats. And some of them are smart, and a lot of them are my friends. And I know because of that there's this too strong, but only mildly too strong, this conflict going on in the Democratic Party over what it is. Whose party is it? Is it the party of Bernie Sanders, or is it the party of the Clintons, or is it something very different? Is it an identity politics party run by somebody else? And I think I think Democrats are likely to do well in the next cycle, certainly the next couple cycles. They're out of power. They won't always be out of power. And so I think it's important to ask questions like, what is the Democratic Party and what does it stand for? I grew up I'm 48, in a world where the Democratic Party was the party of, the faculty lounge, but it was also the party of wage earners. It was a working class party. It was Roosevelt's party. And it's not anymore. And the exit polling confirms that it's the party of the affluent, well-educated, and of the poor. And so what does that mean exactly for policy? So I think it's an interesting conversation. So watching the rejection of the Clintons is a fascinating story. I mean, I covered the 1992 presidential race. And so I always go back and I think, well, would Bill Clinton be a viable candidate as a Democrat now? And of course not. He'd be jeered. He'd be pulled off stage as like a racist or something. I mean, like literally. And I think that's interesting on its face, but I also think there's sort of deeper lessons that come out of that. So,
but is that what you're talking about when we talk?
Yeah, we just did a whole segment on this last week. Whose party is it?
Yeah.
I can tell you this, I've never coordinated anything with any politician ever. I don't like politicians in general. I am friends with no politician, have never been, never would be.
So if there is an idea out there that Fox News or your program is carrying water for the administration, that would really irk you if that was, well, maybe not. You don't
we get all kinds of criticism. In case you can't tell, I don't read any of it, but here's what I know. Fox has been the freest environment I've ever worked in. And I'm not just saying this in order to suck up to my corporate masters, I mean it. There's no interference at all, ever, not one time in the year and 3 months or weeks I've done this. And I love that and I'm grateful for it. But I'm not responsible I don't have any role in it. I have an hour, I can speak for my hour. I love everyone I work with at Fox. Everyone's honest in my experience of them. So that's what I would say. Trump, I disapprove of Trump tweeting at all, okay? I don't want to give the party thing because it's leading. I never vote. So that's the truth.
Okay.
I didn't vote this time, I never do vote. Then you don't have a right to give your opinion? Yeah, I do. And in fact, I do. And I'm registered actually with a party that I sincerely despise because I think it's really a force for bad in this country. It's the Democratic Party. But I'm registered because I live in the district. It's a one-party state, and the one election I always vote in is the mayor's race because it matters. And I own property there. I raise 4 children there. I live in the city, and I think it's worth voting in that election, so I always do. I always vote for the more corrupt candidate over the idealist. Always. The person who will just be happy taking payoffs from developers and leave me alone. It's always the candidate. This is like a meaningful decision in my life, and it's every 4 years. There's always some guy who's like, I'm going to make your life better. I vote against that person every single time. You know what I mean? And it's usually honestly, it's usually whatever. it's some progressive candidate who's got big plans for me. And so I just vote for the status quo, corrupt, criminal operation that runs the city, and I'm really happy with that. I think it is if we all buy into the precepts of democracy, which are that people get to express, I mean, the basic point about democracy is that people have a voice. All people do, even if they belong to a particularly unfashionable group. And that's the point of Trump's election. And it was the most distressing part about the election, actually, was that it confirmed, look, for democracy to work, everyone has to believe that it's real. They really do. And if after, the Immigration Act that changed the country passed in 1965, okay? So that was 51 years before the last election. So during that time, every public opinion poll taken on the question of immigration showed the same thing, which is Americans like immigrants, obviously. No country has ever admitted in peacetime as many immigrants as we have. It's not even close. This has never happened in world history, and we don't have riots because Americans are nice people. Despite what you hear on CNN, they're nice people, actually. They're not bigots. They're very open-minded and they're very nice, and they like immigrants, and they should, because immigrants are awesome. But they also believe that it's their country, and they have a right to determine who comes here. They're sort of I'm not against dinner parties. I love dinner parties. We have them all the time. I choose 12 people, and they come and have dinner at my house. If I didn't get to choose them, if 12 randoms showed up and started eating my food, that would not be a dinner party. It would be a home invasion, okay? So, no, it's true. The difference is that you have control over one and the other is being imposed upon you by force. And so for all these decades, Americans have said exactly that. The overwhelming majority, we want to have control. And we don't. And so what do you conclude after a while? You conclude that I keep voting, I keep putting quarters in the slot machines, and the bars never come up. It's rigged. It's not real. And I don't think that's healthy. If people believe that they have a voice, maybe not a huge voice, not as big a voice as George Soros, but he's a billionaire, I get it, okay? And a very good person. Or Tom Steyer or whatever. No, I'm obviously joking. But look, there are, people who have enough money to buy their own media outlets have more political power than those of us who don't. I get it. But all of us have some power because we can vote. And if we vote in large groups, they have to listen to us. That is the basic understanding of democracy, and that's what keeps the country calm. And that's what all of us growing up in this country were taught as small children. That's why it's a good country, by the way. Because if you don't like something, you don't have to storm the Bastille or burn the police station. You can vote, and you can do it every 2 years, or 4 years, or 6 years. You have lots of opportunities. And over time, maybe not immediately, but over time, they will listen to you because the system will require them to. Schoolhouse Rock, anyone? Okay. So if that proves not to be true, and if the public, the large majority, keeps saying, I would like this, and they don't respond, you start to think, well, maybe this is all fake. And that's when you get mad and start doing stuff that you wouldn't ordinarily do. So it's really important to make sure the democracy is real. And the tragic thing for me in watching this whole Trump thing is, it was like the ruling class in DC, which should be wise enough to know that, they only exist because of democracy. They decided to prove to everybody watching that in fact it's not real. So Trump gets the nomination. The Republican Party, what was their answer to that? We'll take it from the convention. It's what? No, the voters voted for him. It's not your choice. I get it. Sorry, Jeb. But I'm not being mean. I'm just I get it. That's what, they're winners and losers. It's a contest. But what you're not allowed to do is steal it. Because first of all, it's wrong. And second of all, it infuriates people. You steal it, maybe the fans sweep down from the stands onto the field. Maybe they get that mad. Who knows what they do if you treat them like that? Don't do that. But they did. So what they basically did was said, do you secretly suspect that this democracy is really an oligarchy run by a small number of people for their own benefit? Guess what? You're right! They pull the mask off. What are you doing, you nutcase, to do something like that? what you're doing is ensuring that the country is going to be way less happy, way less secure, way more suspicious of you, and much more likely to do something crazy, Dumbo. Like that's literally the last thing you do in a democracy. But they did it because they're not impressive. That's why, because they're self-centered and lacking wisdom. Not because, and I should just make one thing really clear. It's not because they're dumb. I use it as sort of a catch-all term for poor behavior and what motivates it, but that's not true. Like, they're actually smart. That's what makes it more infuriating. Intelligence is not the same as wisdom. Wisdom can't exist without self-awareness. As my father always used to say when I was little, the root of all wisdom is knowing how, he actually used a bad word which I won't repeat, but is knowing how flawed you are. It's true. That's the point where you become wise, when you realize how screwed up you are, when you realize the limits of your own power. Then everything falls into perspective. What's the opposite of that? Hubris. Who's especially prone to that? Powerful men. Not just men, but especially men, I would say. Having known them, having been one at times. You get the feeling that, like, yeah, I don't think you know who you're dealing with here. And you become a buffoon, actually. And sooner or later, you're exposed as a buffoon. This is like the most basic human principle detailed at quite some length in the Old Testament, if you're interested. So anyway, that is a terrible and destabilizing thing. The answer is its mirror image. If you want things to calm down, apply democracy. It's really simple. And by the way, I'm not calling for direct democracy. Like, I get it. I took American history. We have a representative democracy that is designed to filter the passions of the majority through the kind of cool filter of wise people we elect to do that. And it's worked, actually, pretty well. Not perfectly, but pretty well. Better than any other country. And we need to do that again. So in other words, just because the majority all of a sudden wants free ice cream, it doesn't need to be free. But if they keep calling for free ice cream, you gotta give them an ice cream discount at some point. Because it's their country, actually. So if the majority of people say, if they elect a president who wants to build a wall, and you're like, I don't think a wall is gonna work, or I think it's kind of embarrassing to have a wall. I don't care what you think. Build the wall, pal. Because the cost of not building the wall is to tell people that they don't have a voice. If you are rude and dismissive to enough people in public, just at like dinner parties or whatever, meeting them, and you're like, yeah, okay. Oh, you're not important? Yeah, sorry, excuse me. Like, there will come a time when one of those people will get you. People never forget being patronized or dismissed. They never forget it. Your own kids don't forget it. By the way, you can do whatever you want to your kids, because they're literally powerless. So if you're like, you know what? I want you to wear a Viking hat to school today and every day. That's embarrassing, Mommy. I don't care. To school. People make fun of me and beat on me. You could literally do that. Like, maybe you find that amusing. Just do that. At some point, that kid's going to turn 18. Because, by the way, they all do, despite what you want. Like, it just kind of happens. And at that point, what do you think the consequences are going to be of that kind of... Do you see what I'm saying? So the key mistake of people who hold power is believing that they will hold it forever and that they can do whatever they want when they have it. And that is a lie that they tell themselves. I think that's part of it. I also think, and I've thought a lot about this just because my show, whatever you like it or not, it's like the only show where there is a debate every night, and I try to make it a more symmetrical debate. It's very hard to get good, I don't want to beat up on like some college kid every day. It's like, you know what I mean? I don't need to do that. I don't enjoy doing that. So I really try to get the other side to the extent as possible. So I see a lot of what people I disagree with say. And I've really concluded that the differences are far deeper than I thought they were. And Trump has brought this into stark relief because we're not having, so for I've been in TV 22 years and mostly on debate shows. And for most of that time, we were having policy debates. What I thought were, I'm pretty literal, as you may have revealed. And so I assumed they were policy debates. Like, there's this thing, we're debating, name something, I don't know. This policy. I would have these debates, and I'll admit I'm a lifelong hunter, and I, own a lot of, so maybe I'm too emotional about it or something, but I don't think I'm that emotional. And I would have these debates. I'm like, okay, here's the data. Here's the social science. I'm showing you mine. You show me yours, and we'll decide who's got a better case. And for like 20 years, they'd be like, no, I don't care what you say. Like, they were never convinced at all, by anything I ever said. And not just the polemical stuff, but like the facts. And I began to think, maybe we're having two separate conversations. Maybe I'm trying to win this person over with reason, but this person is doing something very different. Maybe this person is just trying to exert control over me. And I thought, that can't be right, because who would want to control another person? That's like literally the last thing I would want to do. I have zero interest in that. Because I don't need to, because I have like a happy life and happy marriage and happy kids, and I don't want to control other people. Why would you want that? I just think it's bizarre. It's so far from the way I see the world that I just couldn't imagine that anybody else felt that way, which is a huge mistake, actually. Just because you don't like pistachio doesn't mean someone else doesn't. People have different motives, actually. And what I've concluded is that this is not at all a policy debate, and I'm an idiot for pretending it was for all these decades. What it's really about is power. So conservatives, or I don't even know conservative, what is the word anymore? I don't even know. People who aren't like on that side, who aren't screaming at people they disagree with in restaurants. If you can't imagine a scenario where you would scream at a politician you didn't vote for in a public place, then we're on the same side, okay? That's all I'm saying. So for people like us, the point of politics is utilitarian. Like, you vote for someone in order that, like, whoever's in power back off enough that you can have a happy family or a successful business or go to church, whatever church you want, just like to make room for the things that actually matter, which are not politics. Okay, that's the whole point from our perspective of the system, is to give us enough freedom to do our thing. That's not how they see it at all. So it really does break down according to temperament. It's not like people are convinced most of the time to join a side. It's like they feel it. I see it in my own children. I really do. I had one child I thought was liberal. I'm serious. Because we'd walk through Georgetown and there were these homeless people, and most of my kids were like, hey, back off, homeless guy. And then I had this one daughter who was like, can we take him home? And I'm like, oh, liberal. And I always used to say to my wife, she's going to grow up, she's going to be chaining herself to the White House gates for animal rights or something. You know what I mean? I really like this child so much, though. So it was like, okay, you got one liberal out of four, it's fine. That child has not turned out to be liberal at all. At all, because she went to all these liberal schools and she looks around and she goes, I'm not quite sure what you're into, but I'm definitely not into that at all. Like, I don't want any part of that. Why do you want any part of that? It's not about the policies. It's like, because she's kind of a happy person and she doesn't need to join a group of unhappy people in order to feel powerful. So what it really comes down to is that the left is a party-based movement. I didn't get this for years, even though it's my job to understand it. I never understood it. It's a party-based movement. The average Republican is a Republican because it's the party that's closest to his views, right? But like, if the Republican Party supported something you didn't agree, that you really hated, you'd be like, yeah, no, I'm not voting for you anymore, right? Of course. Your loyalty isn't to the Republican Party. They just may be the party that represents you. So you want to see them win. So you'll be left alone. Democratic Party, doesn't matter what they do. They invaded Canada tomorrow. You'd watch every MSNBC anchor be like, Canada's been a threat for a long time. We haven't really talked about it. There are Canadians living in our midst. Let's intern them. I'm not kidding. They obey. They're obedient little people. And they're obedient because the group is where their power comes from. This explains a lot, actually. It explains their hysteria at Trump and Brett Kavanaugh and the Congress. So I spent 8 years living in the District of Columbia with Barack Obama as president, who I thought was actually kind of wrecking the country. I'd see Valerie Jarrett at Safeway. I never said word one to her. I shared a backyard with Susan Rice for 6 years. Yeah, I did. I mean, we didn't share a backyard. We had a fence between our backyards. There's her house right there. shaving, and there's Susan Rice. Yeah, okay. I'd see her every Halloween. No, we had a Halloween parade on our street, and I would always have a beer with Susan Rice. I'm serious. Actually, I always got along with Susan Rice. I don't know. I don't want to be mad at people. I didn't see it that way. By the way, one of her kids became this like right winger at Stanford. Good for him. Anyway, but the point is, it never occurred to me, as much as I profoundly disapproved of what she was doing, to be mean to her, because why would you ever do something like that? It's just like it never even occurred to me. Our kids played in the same soccer team, actually. But anyway, whatever. The point is, because it's DC. Now, the other side feels like you literally are not allowed to go to Starbucks. Like, you're just not allowed. Why? Because they are so threatened by the loss of political power that they can't think straight. What you're seeing is people who are threatened. Like, I feel like I'm pretty reasonable until I feel threatened. No, I'm serious. Like, if I felt like you were threatening me, threatening my family, my job, something I really cared about, I'd be very unreasonable with you. And I think you would be with me if you felt I was threatening you. Like, really, as a person, threatened. An election does not threaten me. It threatens them. Because a lack of political power means to them a lack of personal power. They are personally invested. Politics is how they feel powerful. They are terrified people. And politics makes them feel strong. I know I'm getting kind of shrinky on you here. But it's true. It's totally true. This has just come to me in like the past month after all these years of having arguments over policy. And I'm like, well, but maybe we could find the best way. Like, no, I don't care what the best way is. I want to make sure you obey me. And you really think of it this is the last thing I'll say, but think of it this way. So this is a group full of, I don't know what your politics are, but I think probably not that many. Yeah, I know what your politics are. Okay, just kidding. But when you go back tonight to wherever you live, I bet you $20 a person that you're not going to lie awake thinking, somewhere in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, 3,000 miles from here, there is someone who doesn't agree with me. And I want to make sure that person is forced to agree with me, or I'm not going to sleep well, I'll be honest with you. In fact, I'll bet you another $20 you won't think of Williamsburg, Brooklyn at all tonight. But I can promise you that somewhere in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, there are a whole lot of people worrying that in the Mississippi Delta somewhere, in a town you've never heard of, there is one guy who's not fully with the program. And he must be brought to heel. He has real questions about this new bathroom policy. And we need to get him in line. Because that's not politics. What you are practicing is politics. What they are practicing is theology. That's an evangelical faith. A faith without a God. It's a secular religion, but it's a religion nonetheless. It's a religion that forces others to convert or suffer. That's exactly what it is. And that's why the emotional temperature is so high, unsustainably high. It's such a, I have, children in college, 2 children in college right now, and another on the way. And so it's a question that I think about a lot. And there are a couple, it depends upon how you think of it. I guess the obvious point is that a lot of our humanities programs are not only a joke, and I'm not, by the way, there's a lot about American higher education that leads the world still. And I think if you're taking engineering classes or the sciences or studying to be a veterinarian, or there are a lot of really serious disciplines that are still taught and taught better than they are anywhere else. No one in my family's ever taken a class like that. I come from a long line of people with fake jobs. My father was anchor of ABC in LA, and you know what I mean? My mother was an artist, and you know what I mean? So like in my world, it's English and history. That's what we study. And that's what my children have studied. And I have watched it really carefully and concluded that like they're not really teaching anything, so it's sort of a joke. But worse than that, there's a huge cost to this, actually, and not just a financial cost. It's the single greatest expense for most families. The student loan debt load is at literally record highs, another story that no one reports, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a huge personal cost to it. There's never been a time in history where a society has taken the overwhelming majority of young people between 18 and 22 and forced them to be idle, actually. You know, there is some percentage of college students who get a lot out of it and are focused and driven. I was not that guy. That's for sure. I never should have gone to college, like ever. And my father in his wisdom didn't want me to go and really disapproved of me going. He said, you're gonna be a journalist, don't go to college, you're idiotic. He never visited, I don't think he knows where I went. He was so unimpressed, and he was right. But there's never been a society that's done that wholesale, and you know why it happened. It happened because of the GI Bill and the promise that was the key to taking, the step into the class above you. That was key to the American dream. But the truth of it is, it's not actually for most people. And so what you get, especially for young men, you lock up boys from, during the foremost vigorous years of their life in this kind of Nerf padded room and feed them beer. And a lot of them go crazy or I'm not joking, or get addicted a lot. I mean, what's the addiction or alcoholism rate of, kids who spent 4 years in college? It's unbelievably high. It's like Russia high. It's bad. Russia! So there's a huge cost to this. But how to interpret, how to understand what the actual hysteria, I'm not using that word lightly, like the clinical hysteria, the Freudian hysteria that we're watching on college campuses now, the total clampdown on speech and thought, where anybody who has, even the most moderate person who's like, are you really sure? Shut up! You're getting thrown out. What is that about? And if you think about it sort of longitudinally, or you pull back a little bit with some perspective, what you're really seeing are the last moments of it, actually. So people who feel secure, who feel like they have power and will have it for a long time, have a pretty light hand, actually, on others. They don't need to act like that, because in the end, they know they're in charge. When you start to feel like you're losing control, and this is true across regimes, by the way, including academic regimes, you start to really clamp down in a way that beclowns you, that makes you like an idiot. When you decide that Ben Shapiro is a right-wing extremist and must be destroyed, it's like, what? Seriously, there's an amazing videotape that says it all to me. It's from 1989, and it's of Nicolae Ceausescu, who was, of course, along with his lovely wife Elena, the dictator of Romania when it was a Soviet satellite state. And in 1989, there was, in effect, a coup, an uprising, and he was swiftly tried by a group of officers in a makeshift courtroom and led out to behind the building with his wife in the snow, wearing overcoats. And the whole thing was videotaped. And you can watch it, but everything up to that was videotaped. And so there's Ceausescu standing there, and he's run this country for 40 years as a god. Okay, really, it's like on the North Korean model almost, like they worshipped him. And in a flash, he realizes. So as he's being led out in chains by the guard who's literally about to he turns and starts barking orders at the guard. And I'm thinking to myself, really? Lacking some perspective, I would say. You have about 45 seconds left to breathe, and you're yelling orders at the guys, but why are you doing that? Because that's what they always do when they feel they're losing control. Always. So what we're really seeing is the effect of the internet. Talk to a young person, you may be one of them, probably are, who is not with the program, doesn't need to be a right-winger or whatever, but not with the program. You know what the program is, what we're all required to believe, all the lies that we're required by law to tell all day long. So let's say you don't believe that, and you're 22 and you're in a college. You have decided that you're thinking for yourself. That is a radical act in the current moment, okay? And you're getting all of your information from like-minded people on the internet. And it really is like a religious awakening. Talk to some of these kids. I know you know what I'm talking about if you've just been in college. Like you're reading stuff, you're like, wait, everything they're telling me is a total lie. Because it is. That is happening across this country. I meet these kids. My children are some of them. And I don't mean anything creepy, hateful, anything like that. But once you start to realize the amount of dishonesty out there, Like, it's over. They can't control you again. They can't control your brain, which is exactly what they're trying to do. We can control people's behavior. Societies are allowed to do that. You can't sleep in a crosswalk. Not allowed. But we've never tried to control people's minds because that's the definition of totalitarianism. That's now what we're trying to do. Why are we trying to do that? Because the people in charge realize that the free exchange of information online makes it actually impossible for them to control what people think. So I spend my whole life complaining about the propaganda on these dumb TV networks we compete with, and Crush, by the way. But the truth is, it doesn't matter. None of that matters. It doesn't matter what Stephanie Rule says in the morning or whatever the Don Lemon guy or whatever on CNN. I'm pronouncing it that way. I know it's not correct, but it makes me laugh, so that's what I'm calling him, Don Lemon. It doesn't matter because nobody younger than me, well into middle age, is ever going to see it. Because young people don't watch that stuff because it's too dumb. They read the internet where you can say whatever you want.